Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of Eternalism Weighs In. My name is David, and the title of this podcast is Unmasking Postmormonism and the Faith Crisis Movement. This is episode 3. With 2 introductory episodes already behind us, we are now in a favorable position to administer our first of 2 post-Mormon inoculations, which first inoculation consists in the unmasking of postmormonism and this faith crisis movement. Again, in the previous episodes, it was noted, time and time again, that with the recent emergence of postmormonism, your family is at risk of a faith crisis. To safeguard our families from this post-Mormon-induced faith crisis is the very purpose, then, for our taking the time and making the effort in this series of episodes for the unmasking of postmormonism. So let's get started. This first post-Mormon inoculation will consist in 7 pointers, each of which will be discussed one by one and will go a long ways towards this unmasking of postmormonism and thereby the safeguarding of our families from this post-Mormon-induced faith crisis. Before we begin with these 7 pointers, let us set the stage with these comments about post-Mormonism in general and John DeLynne's Mormon Stories podcast in particular. Post-Mormonism, as previously noted, is a growing cultural movement as disaffected Latter-day Saints who have called it quits increase in numbers due to either doctrinal, historical, political, social, or personal disagreements within the church, particularly progressive, social, and cultural issues which in their minds continually mount in importance and entangle families and family members in what appears to them to be a no-win situation, leading to what many within the post-Mormon community have referred to as a faith crisis. One of those leading the way in helping disaffected members to navigate their way through this personal faith crisis is John DeLynne and his Mormon Stories podcast. He is now offering a new podcast series called Understanding Mormonism. At the beginning of this podcast, he makes the following disclaimer. My only goal within this channel, Understanding Mormonism, is to provide you with the information that you need about Mormonism to make informed decisions about your life. That's it. No other agenda. Not trying to take anyone's faith away. Not trying to take your faith away from you if you have faith. Not trying to tear down the church. I literally just want to help people make important decisions about Mormonism, so there is less pain and more joy in the world. Despite the rhetorical disclaimer, it is obvious John DeLynne clearly views that the pain in the world would be far less and the joy far more if Mormonism would simply go away, and the sooner the better. It's as if John DeLynne had said, I'm not here to pull the plug for you. I'm just here to convince you as to why you should. The first of our 7 pointers for unmasking post-Mormonism is to understand post-Mormonism's twofold charge against the church, which consists in post-Mormonism's claim that the church is not only false, but also harmful. One of the first things we need to understand about post-Mormonism is that post-Mormons make not just 1, but 2 serious charges against the church. The first of these 2 charges is that Mormonism itself as a religious faith is false. This charge is immediately followed up with the obvious religious or moral directive that, if it's false, then do not believe it. The second of these 2 charges against Mormonism is that Mormonism is not only false, but it is harmful, which charge is also immediately followed up by the directive or battle cry, so it must be stopped. Again, a good example of post-Mormonism's twofold charge against the church is John DeLynne's Mormon Stories series, wherein he makes it crystal clear to his listeners that he views the church to be not only false, but to be extremely harmful as well. He views the church to be false because he views all of the church's foundational truth claims to be colossal fabrications. And he views the church to be harmful because he views nearly all the church's social, political, doctrinal, and cultural positions to be of a racist, sexist, homophobic, deceptive, and pernicious nature. These are very serious charges, and so this brings us to the second of our 7 pointers for unmasking post-Mormonism. The second of our 7 pointers for unmasking postmormonism consists in Latter-day Saints coming to understand that postmormons take this twofold charge against the church, both seriously and personally. An important part of grasping the often combustible nature associated with postmormonism is to understand that postmormons take this twofold charge against Mormonism very seriously and very personally. Seriously, because they truly believe that both a falsehood and a great harm has been perpetrated upon the world, and personally because they themselves feel that they have been personally impacted or harmed by their association with Mormonism. In other words, this faith crisis is not child's play, but is viewed by them as being deadly serious. In fact, to emphasize the life and death seriousness of these two charges, they often compare Mormonism and the Mormon Church to be like a house on fire or a burning building with many lives at stake. Now, if Mormonism's truth claims were simply false, they argue, then perhaps one could just walk away from the church and never give it a second thought. But in their minds, Mormonism is not just false, it is also harmful, and so one cannot simply just walk away, but one must speak up. Think of it this way. If one wakes up to discover one's apartment complex on fire, do you simply save yourself, or do you do all you can to try to warn others? Obviously, you'll do the latter. Well, this is precisely how post-Mormons view themselves and the situation they are in, and as to why they cannot simply walk away from Mormonism, but feel morally compelled to speak up and speak out against the church, and warn as many other Latter-day Saints as possible, particularly when it comes to the various progressive social and cultural issues that are of central importance to most post-Mormons. Which observation takes us to the third of our 7 pointers for unmasking postmormonism. The third of our 7 pointers for unmasking postmormonism consists in Latter-day Saints coming to understand that post-Mormons view themselves as champions of liberal and progressive social and cultural issues. It's important to note that post-Mormons view themselves as being champions of liberal and progressive social issues, such as racism, sexism, feminism, same-sex marriage, gay rights, and social justice. In their minds, post-Mormons sincerely believe that this liberal and progressive stance puts them on the right and winning side of history, and church members on the wrong and losing side. And while post-Mormons currently insist that they are not part of the present-day cancel culture with its efforts to silence others with different opinions, they are, nonetheless, eager to point out what is for them the illegitimacy of the Book of Mormon due to what they claim are its racist and sexist implications. In other words, it is only a matter of time before the Book of Mormon, like other politically incorrect books, such as Moby Dick, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Pride and Prejudice, and To Kill a Mockingbird, to name just a few, will also be on the cancel culture's hit list. For example, given this cancel culture mentality, coupled with the emphasis on social justice and identity politics, let's just see how Nephi, the very first prophet we meet in the Book of Mormon, fares given all the negative intersectional identity markers that he possesses. The Book of Mormon starts out with the following words, "I, Nephi, having been born of goodly parents." The problem is that once we discover the identity of who Nephi and his parents really are, we find all the negative intersectional identity markers that drive the cancel culture. Take, for example, this hit list of intersectional identity markers that Nephi is found guilty of. In other words, the fact that Nephi is white implies that Nephi is inherently a racist. He's male, implying that he's inherently a sexist. He's straight and not gay, implying that he is inherently homophobic. Nephi is an Israelite, implying that he is inherently Islamophobic. He opposed the biblical emphasis on the nuclear family, implying that he is inherently xenophobic. He and his family were exceedingly rich, implying that they were inherently elitist and oppressors of the poor. Nephi was large in stature, implying that he was inherently a bully, as is evidenced by his bullying of Zoram, with a join up with us or die mentality. And to add insult to injury, and even after possessing all these deplorable and negative identity markers, Nephi still had the audacity to consider himself as being highly favored of the Lord, indicating that he was a full-fledged narcissist. After all, why in the world would God ever view a racist, sexist, homophobic, Islamophobic, xenophobic, elitist, and bully as being highly favored in his eyes. The point is that with all these negative intersectional identity markers, the Book of Mormon is doomed to be canceled by this cancel culture. And post-Mormons know this and are counting on it, because the church's fate is tied to the Book of Mormon. And so we see that Mormonism itself is in grave danger of being canceled as well. The fourth of our 7 pointers for unmasking post-Mormonism consists in Latter-day Saints coming to understand that post-Mormons need to fill a moral, religious, and spiritual void to replace Mormonism's plan of salvation, such as the adoption of secular Buddhism as just one example. As mentioned in a previous episode, and whether post-Mormons know it or not, and whether they will admit it or not, their post-Mormon induced faith crisis was also a leap of faith, in that they are simply exchanging one religious, moral, and spiritual identity for another. In other words, in what they call their post-Mormon faith journey, they are now in need of replacing the Latter-day Saint plan of salvation with some other worldview. Some of the more popular alternatives being offered are atheism, secular humanism, secular Buddhism, as well as numerous evangelical and free grace offerings, such as Mormons for Jesus. The point is that there is often a religious, moral, and spiritual void that needs to be filled once they resign from the church, and that filling this spiritual void is a big part of the post-Mormon experience. It appears that one of the more popular spiritual alternatives and growing trends among post-Mormons is that of secular Buddhism, which through meditation offers inner peace, harmony, and mindfulness, and if taken seriously, frees you to enjoy life. This mantra to breathe, engage, nourish, explore, and thrive means, of course, to do all these joyful and life-freeing things outside the strictures of organized religion, belief in God, or moral absolutes, such as are found within the church. The point is that while evangelicalism may offer its Christian adherents personal salvation through free grace, secular Buddhism goes one better by offering its adherents a spirituality built upon the shifting sands of secular Buddhism and pure consciousness, and which, in their minds, happily comes without any of the moral, social, religious, institutional, or dogmatic trappings of organized religion, thereby clearing away, in their post-Mormon and postmodern minds, all the noise of religious orthodoxy and the burdensome strictures of organized religion or moral absolutes, all of which they insist frees you to enjoy life as you and you alone see it. The fifth of our 7 pointers for unmasking post-Mormonism consists in Latter-day Saints coming to understand that post-Mormons view Mormon historicity to be its Achilles heel. The fact that post-Mormons view Mormon historicity to be Mormonism's Achilles heel is why we will be putting so much emphasis on understanding historicity in future episodes. In any event, in viewing Mormon historicity as Mormonism's Achilles heel simply means that post-Mormons believe that the best way to put an end to Mormonism and thereby stop it from doing any more social, cultural, or political harm than what in their minds it has already done is to undermine what they believe to be Mormonism's weakest spot and most vulnerable liability, that is, Mormon historicity, along with the Church's foundational truth claims. The idea is that if these foundational truth claims can be systematically and methodically debunked, then perhaps Mormonism itself will collapse of its own weight, and they will no longer have to worry about all the disagreeable and, what is for them, infuriating social, religious, moral, cultural, and political positions taken and promoted by the Church. The sixth of our 7 pointers for unmasking post-Mormonism consists in Latter-day Saints coming to understand that post-Mormon historicity is viewed by post-Mormons as the jackhammer for drilling down and debunking the Church's foundational truth claims. Again, one can begin to see how the debunking of foundational truth claims of the Church are ground zero for this entire post-Mormon faith crisis movement. In fact, post-Mormon historicity, whether implicitly or explicitly, consists in a tenacious and methodical drill down of the Church's foundational truth claims. This jackhammer drill down is tenacious because the historical drill down will not stop until each and every one of the church's foundational truth claims have been debunked and collapsed into mere rubble. This jackhammer drill down is methodical because post-Mormon historicity does not jump around from this truth claim to another, but rather begins strategically with Joseph Smith and the church's origins, and drills down on the historical authenticity of one foundational truth claim after another and in its chronological order, beginning, for example, with the various first vision accounts and methodically and chronologically working its way to the Book of Mormon and then on to the Book of Abraham. To understand how this jackhammer or red pilling drill down works, let us present just one example of a foundational truth claim of the church, which postmormonism believes has been totally discredited and thoroughly debunked by historians both within and without the church. When Latter-day Saints envision the prophet Joseph Smith translating the Book of Mormon, they usually have in their minds a portrait such as is portrayed here, with Joseph busily translating the Egyptian characters, character by character and metal plate by metal plate, in a rational, studious, and matter-of-fact manner, and of course with the revelatory aid of the Urim and Thummim. This particular portrait then, and many others just like it, have been presented over the years as an authentic representation or historical portrait of Joseph Smith translating the plates. Mormon and non-Mormon historians, however, have gone on to show that this common idea of how the Book of Mormon was translated is not at all an authentic historical portrait of what actually took place. In fact, this next historical portrait of the prophet Joseph Smith transcribing or dictating the text of the Book of Mormon by using a seer stone placed in the bottom of a hat and pressing his face against the rim to block out the surrounding light turns out to be a far more authentic historical portrait. The problem is that when your average faithful Latter-day Saint discovers for the first time that Joseph Smith translated the majority of the Book of Mormon using the same seer stone that he used when treasure hunting, and that he didn't even need the plates, but dictated the text straight off the seer stone, 20 to 30 characters at a time, they are quite shocked, even upset because it is so foreign to their gospel understandings. And it is this unexpected drill down to historical authenticity that gives rise to what is today called a faith crisis, wherein a foundational truth claim has been shattered. This disturbing discovery is referred to as being red-pilled. On the other hand, to go on believing in blissful ignorance, and despite the historical evidence that the first portrait is the authentic portrait, is to be blue-pilled. Sadly, the tragic and false alternative many Latter-day Saints are being faced with today is to either suffer a faith crisis, which more often than not leads them out of the church, or to live in blissful ignorance of their own Mormon historicity. This, then, is just but one example of an historical drill down on the church's foundational truth claims. One can only imagine the disturbing and upsetting effect that one tenacious, methodical, and historical drill down after another will have on an active, unsuspecting, and lifelong member's faith. The hope, of course, at least on the part of postmormonism, is that if enough of Mormonism's foundational truth claims can be historically discredited or debunked, that the foundation will eventually give way and Mormonism will collapse in upon itself and will not be capable of recovering. In short, the hope is that Mormonism will be red-pilled out of existence. The seventh and last of our 7 pointers for unmasking postmormonism consists in Latter-day Saints coming to understand that post-Mormons believe they know your religion and your history better than you do. In order to give the Mormon Stories podcast a notoriety boost among members of the church, John DeLynn has taken advantage of what I am going to call billboard red pilling. The messages seem harmless enough, but the implications of this red pilling could not be clearer. For example, the first billboard, on the bottom left, implies that you don't know your religion, while we do. The second billboard implies that you don't know your history either, while we do. And the third billboard implies that experiencing a faith crisis is a lot more common than you think, and not to worry, for we'll be there to help you get through this. Get through what? Well, through this post-Mormon induced faith crisis. A prime example of this post-Mormon induced faith crisis is the CES letter mentioned previously, wherein they kick up a dust storm leading to a faith crisis and then offer support groups and podcasts to help you find your way out of the blinding dust storm they themselves created. One wonders how many red-pilled post-Mormons realize that in leaving the church and abandoning their testimonies, that they have simply replaced one one-sided historical narrative for another. With the presentation of all 7 of our pointers for unmasking post-Mormonism, we can confidently state that we have now successfully administered the first of our 2 post-Mormon inoculations for safeguarding our families from this post-Mormon-induced faith crisis. And you are now prepared to receive the second dose on understanding historicity. Again, the fact that post-Mormons view Mormon historicity to be Mormonism's Achilles heel is why we will be putting so much emphasis on understanding historicity in the coming episodes. Before ending this episode, let us once again put a plug in for our course on eternalism by encouraging you to visit our website at christianeternalism.org. The great fundamental laws of the universe, writes Elder Witzel, are foundation stones in religion as well as in science. The principle that matter is indestructible belongs as much to theology as to geology. The theology which rests upon the few basic laws of nature is unshakable, and the great theology of the future will be such a one. Elsewhere he writes, spirituality is first an attitude of faith toward eternal realities, which stands in stark contrast to the spirituality of secular Buddhism, which emphasizes pure consciousness and originating rather than acknowledging these eternal realities. A spirituality built upon the rock of reality and in conformity with these eternal realities is far removed from a spirituality built upon the shifting sands of secular Buddhism and the nothingness and emptiness of pure consciousness.